I am Mo Al-Khalaf, a postdoctoral research fellow and chair of the trainee committee at the University of Ottawa Heart Institute. I hope everyone is healthy and safe at this time, whatever you are. Thank you for joining us on this virtual science seminar series, brought to you by the BEaTS research and radio team, all working from home now, but still continuing to bring science to the community. Some housekeeping notes before we get started. The seminar will be a 30 to 40-minute uninterrupted presentation, followed by 10 minutes of questions. Today, I am your seminar moderator. Please keep your microphones and camera off during the presentation. If you have issues connecting to the audio, you can call in by phone, and please refer to the email sent after your registration for phone numbers and meeting ID and password. For all questions, please send in a private chat to me, and I will ask Dr. Aspuru-Guzik all the questions after the presentation. Include your name, title, your institute or program affiliation whenever possible. All these seminars will be recorded and made available at the BEaTS Research Radio YouTube channel soon afterwards. Check our website or Twitter for release. So today I have the pleasure of moderating an exciting lecture by our guest speaker, Dr. Alán Aspuru-Guzik. To say a brief introduction about our guest speaker today, Dr. Alán Aspuru-Guzik obtained his Bachelor of Science degree in chemistry from the National Autonomous University of Mexico. He received a PhD in physical chemistry from the University of California, Berkeley. From there, he was hired by Harvard University as an assistant professor, quickly rising through the ranks to associate professor and then full professor by 2013. In 2018, Professor Aspuru-Guzik, after probably an intense recruitment effort, moved to the University of Toronto as a Canada 150 research chair. Dr. Aspuru-Guzik is the head of the Matter Lab, a multidisciplinary team composed of chemists, physicists, computer scientists, and more, working both on theory and experiment on aspects of material discovery, machine learning, self-driving chemical laboratories, and quantum computing. Fascinating stuff indeed. Thank you so much, Dr. Aspuru-Guzik, for joining us this morning. Welcome, and please take the virtual podium for this seminar series.
Thank you. I might need to be allowed to share my screen.
Yes.
But let's do that.
Yes.
Okay, let's get started. So I know this is a more of a biomedical audience. So you might wonder why you have a person that is a materials discovery person, but it will make sense in a little bit why we span those two different areas. Okay. So I'm going to just begin by making an exercise in terms of sizes. If you want to think about how many stars are out there, but even more, how many atoms are in the visible universe, you will find out there's about 10 to the 82 atoms in the visible universe. So that's a huge number, but we want to compare that number to the number of possible molecules we could make. Remember, that was just counting atoms, but if you think about taking the different types of atoms and combinatorially making valid molecules, valid organic molecules that you could synthesize and test, for example, for a biological application or a materials application, we end up with a number that is comparable to that number. Different estimates put the size of reachable chemical space to 10 to the 60 to 10 to the 180 molecules. An insane amount of space, right? We have barely explored it in terms of how many molecules the humans have actually thought of or synthesized, which is in the tens of millions, perhaps 100 million. And therefore, that difference in orders of magnitude is an interesting question for me and my group. And why is that? Because if you think about what will be the interesting directions that we could go to, they include, for example, questions related to clean energy, but also questions related to health, very common, very, very relevant topic today. But plastic pollution is another very important aspect, right? So all of these can be solved with molecules and materials, and that chemical space will contain perhaps improved performance or improved properties for particular applications. So that's kind of like the social motivation, but also it could also be a purely money-making opportunity. Okay, so this article from Barron's identifies 3 technologies that could create a $1 trillion market. One of them is CRISPR. The other one is quantum computing. And the other one that was identified in this article was basically AI for materials, which we want to extend today to AI for molecular discovery, right? So it's interesting because as we will see, artificial intelligence not only is perhaps accelerating processes, but this interesting article at MIT Technology Review challenges the idea that maybe perhaps poses the challenging question that perhaps even the way we think about science could be, enhanced by artificial intelligence. So again, the MIT Technology Review was very kind and gave a top 10 breakthrough technologies of this year to AI discovered molecules, the topic of this talk. And I'm very happy because we were mentioned there. I work at the University of Toronto in the Vector Institute, and my startup company robotics is involved, and my collaborators in Silicon Medicine are involved as well in this recognition. Obviously, there's other players like Atomwise, which is a Canadian company, Benevolent AI, and many others are working on the space. So it's not only us. We were just lucky to be mentioned, but that's pretty cool. And then this is another interesting thing that happened, obviously, is there was another breakthrough technology, quantum supremacy, which is the idea that quantum computers are quote unquote getting there. Right now, they just were able to get interesting insights into what is the power of a quantum computer. And Google showed that a quantum computer could potentially outperform a classical computer in a very specific task. So I'm very proud also that our startup company, Zapara Computing, was mentioned there. And Zapara researchers and myself just published an article 2 years ago thinking about how quantum computers could help in drug discovery. So this is way in the future. This is not now. This is going to take 5-10 years or even more to get to some moment in which we will be able to actually use a quantum computer to do drug discovery. Okay, maybe 2 decades, who knows? But in the meantime, of course, we are preparing ourselves, and there are small-scale applications of quantum computers. So it gives you an idea of what are the tastes of my lab, what were we thinking about, and we're mostly thinking about what are the frontier areas of computer science that could impact chemistry and material science. So one of them is AI, and the other one is quantum computing. Both recognized in this MIT Technology Review, which is very nice. But now, again, coming back to the chemical space challenge, if you look at this, right, we have the problem that when we actually go down to synthesis, we end up only making tens of molecules, right, for any project. Of course, there are library technologies like very exciting DNA encoded library technologies in biology. But can we do kind of like a more intelligent way of searching chemical space? And you can see some of the orders of magnitude of typical projects that I'm involved in terms of how many molecules can you actually think about. So some of my applications involve solar energy and batteries. I'm just gonna do something here. I'm gonna skip because I just realized that we have not as much time as I thought we were gonna have. So let me just skip a few slides. I hate when people do that, but here I am, skipping a few slides. So in applications such as the battery application I just skipped to have time to tell you more about biology, the problem that we have when we have been discovering materials is that making molecules is very slow, right? So if you are an organic chemist and you're in the hood doing things by hand, you can do art. You can create very important molecules such as Taxol. But if making a molecule takes about a few months of a human time, then whatever we do in the computer is going to be impacted by that. So we're thinking a lot about platforms, right? Ways of actually accelerating the design, the test, and the of molecules of interest for different applications. Because you look at how long does it take to, for example, make a material and take it to market is usually reported, for example, for solar cells, it took 25 years for the first solar cells to make to market after they were experimental ones, after the effect was discovered. And the same thing has happened to light emitting diodes and other technologies. And drugs, actually, as you know, can take billions of dollars to go to market, right? So if you were to insert automation and AI in as many processes as possible, you can think about it as the breaking of bottlenecks, right? So every time you have a kinetic bottleneck of discovery, you can try to accelerate it by trying to incorporate computation, robotics, and AI decision making, right? So that's an important aspect we'll be discussing. That type of idea might allow us to perhaps take this $10 million in 10-year kind of rough benchmark to about 1 year and $1 million, which might be very relevant in the timescales of, for example, clean energy research, or the timescales of this pandemic, say. So that's what I like to call a self-driving laboratory or a closed-loop laboratory, right? So unlike the high-throughput ideas of the 1990s and 2000s, that we had these robots that are actually just doing a lot of experiments, what we want to do is perhaps minimize the number of experiments, but every time we gather an experimental data point, adapt our Bayesian belief of what was the response surface of that particular experiment, right? And that will allow us to actually then try to, at the same time, accelerate the number of experiments, but minimize them, so to speak, so that the least number of trials is the one that gives us takes us to the right answer. So we need to actually build these platforms that integrate all the things together. And that's what, since my move to Toronto, we've been building one to make organic lasers. Again, a materials application that I will not present to you today too much because we are in the process of building all of that. So is it possible to actually use data science and high throughput, say, coupled? And in this case, not too much AI, but to make something meaningful. And Moore's law has been always touted as one of the main, more interesting laws of acceleration in human technology. We keep, doubling the amount of computing we can do, say, on supercomputers as we move on, even after we run out of speed ups in terms of clock speeds in chips. But remarkably, since 2001, say, to 2015, the cost of sequencing a human genome nowadays in 2020 is way below $1,000, and that's more accelerated than even Moore's law. So that is a success story that comes from biology, and my question has been, can we actually do something like this for materials? So one of the things that we can think about, say, for example, in terms of synthesis, is to use very simple chemical reactions to try to reach the vast amounts of chemical space of the particular region that we want to explore, right? So just to give you an example, this is a slide from my colleague Marty Burke from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, where he thinks that carbon-carbon couplings, for example, Suzuki couplings, which are very versatile and quite simple, with an iterative coupling scheme that involves protection and deprotection using metaboronates, he can reach about 60 to 70% of the natural product space with perhaps 1,000 fragments, right? So these fragments will be more complex and they will contain chirality and other aspects that usually might be a different strategy. But that's an example of how to use very few chemical reactions, say a handful, but then automate them very well and use AI to do that, so that we can perhaps reach not the entire chemical space, but regions of interest. So we wrote a report, a couple of years ago on this topic called the materials acceleration platforms that I recommend people to read. There were also other papers that we wrote in Science and Nature Reviews Materials, as well as Trends in Chemistry. They kind of are somehow perspectives that are associated with this report. Several scientists got together in Mexico City, and we under the auspices of Mission Innovation, which is a fantastic initiative started under the Paris Agreement. We identify these areas that you can read on the screen as potential areas of research and development to try to discover materials. So we'll move into that, and I'm going to first start talking about AI, and then I'm going to move briefly to experimental optimization and robotics, then to open this talk for questions. So let's come back to the title of this talk. It's inspired by the movie Blade Runner and the book To Wondrous Realm of Electricship by Philip K. Dick, which I think it's very relevant today because some of the themes have to do with artificial intelligence and robotics, and it's kind of like a predictive movie in the sense of that, and and it's a little bit apocalyptic as well. So it's kind of goes with the themes right now. So in that movie, Deckard, which is Harrison Ford, this is Blade Runner, whose job was to identify and kill androids. These are the data points that he's faced with. And in this particular case, I'm spoiling the movie for you. Some of them are androids, some of them are humans, and he has to eliminate the androids. That particular philosophical question in this movie is if Descartes himself is a human or an android, and I fully spoiled the movie for you. Although you should have watched it, it's a classic. So what is interesting about this example is the two different roles of AI here. So Descartes is doing a particular AI task that is usually technically called classification or regression. In this particular case, he has to classify these data points into humans or androids. Whereas Barry is doing something interesting. He's generating human behavior. He has to pretend he's a human, but he's an android. So he has to sample for probability distribution of human motion, speech, thought, etc., and try to fool a human, right? And that's an interesting mode, because I argue that will allow us to do what I'm showing here on the right part of the screen. This is called so-called inverse design. Okay, a very interesting direction where you can actually try to get a property and try to backtrack what place of chemical space is associated with a property. And in this particular slide here, I'm trying to show the evolution of at least my thinking. Early on in my career, I thought that the whole idea was to think about high throughput, and then I moved on to the idea that no, high throughput is going to be hopeless in the sense that your chemical space is so vast that it's like shooting bullets into empty space, right? So you need to actually really think about, like a sniper, and every experiment that you do, try to maximize chemical property. And that's the idea of inverse design. And this, as I show you, that kind of BATI type of generative modeling allows you to think about inverse design. So let's just talk about some of the terminology here, because this is a diverse audience. So when people think about AI, sometimes they think about general AI, for example, the Terminator. What I'm talking about here is shallow AI, a very particular type of AI. For example, the AI involved in self-driving cars is shallow AI. But also, in particular, there's different areas of AI, many different ones. I mean, two of them that are relevant to us, chemists, material scientists, biologists, is perhaps robot process automation, which is an entire field, and also machine learning. Okay, machine learning is a subfield that is associated with the idea that as I gain more experiences, say I see more data points, I am perhaps able to perform a task better and better. Okay, so it is a tool commonly associated with data science, where the more data I see, the better models I have to make decisions. For example, classifying androids or generating human behavior. And in particular, there's many aspects of machine learning. Some of the ones I worked a lot is by Bayesian modeling and deep learning, which I will mention in this talk. But this is by no means a very exhaustive division of this amazing field. What is really nice about this field is that it's permeating the physical sciences and the biological sciences very rapidly. And I consider it kind of like a new toolkit in our arsenal as scientists and engineers to be able to accelerate the way we think. So what is the difference between, say, you might have heard about this famous quantitative structure property relationships, beautiful work that people have done over the years on chemoinformatics that allows people to actually identify new drug candidates, new materials, etc. And that work is very good. It's actually related to the idea that if you take a molecule and you handcraft interesting features, you might think that the molecule has a particular attack angle that is interesting, or a particular electronic property, or a particular spatial property. And then you take those features and build a vector out of those values that you actually calculate or infer from that molecule, in this case, calculate. And then you actually build, in this particular case, a generalizable linear model. You will take this vector x prime, say in this particular case, multiplied by this weights w, perhaps shifted by a particular constant, and then you will try to do some prediction about your molecular material. It's like the way you want to think about deep learning and these neural networks that I will briefly discuss, very briefly how they work, is that you might want to learn that representation. Now we're going to have a vector z here, okay? And then we're going to feed it in a particular generalizable linear model and do exactly the same thing that we used to do before as chemists or material scientists. But now we're going to learn those features, okay? And arguably, it's much better to learn the features, because when you handcraft them, there's no optimality there. You decide this is an interesting feature, but now if you have enough data, you might be able to let the machine also take over that task. That's kind of what the revolution of machine learning and deep learning to identify faces of pictures of animals and cats and things like that came from, right? So how do these neurons work? Again, this is not a very mathematical talk, but these neurons, the neural networks, are just mathematical objects. They are kind of related to the neurons in the brain, as a little bit of inspiration, but they are mostly a mathematical object where you take these inputs and then you have these weights that you can use to combine, and notice this function again here. You will use these weights to combine those features, and again, these features in this case could be handcrafted, or it could be, the particular molecular graph or molecular tree structure or the protein or whatever gene expression network you're thinking about. So the features of the problem at hand are fed into these objects called neurons that have this nonlinear activation function. This is one called RELO, for example. But there's many nonlinearities that you can introduce there, and all of those nonlinear activation functions allow you to kind of filter out data, okay? And they're essential actually to this process. And what you do is you concatenate several layers, that's what this is called deep learning, several layers of these neurons in different architectures, kind of like the brain architectures of a worm or a mouse or a rat or a human or a president, say, like Donald Trump's neural network is very, very, very simple neural network, right? Maybe it has 100 neurons, right? So those type of neural networks will, depending on how you connect it and depending on what activation functions you use and what weights, they can do wonderful things, right? But it's nothing more than a very flexible way of fitting functions in some sense. So one of the early things that we did was take this type of classical idea of the cheminformatics community to try to create some sort of molecular fingerprint that was generic, right? So it's very nice here because it's similar to the spirit of a neural network. So you want to have something that is not necessarily handcrafted, that is generic, and they built this beautiful, discrete fingerprinting that takes an atom, then the nearest neighbors, then the next nearest neighbors, and then the next nearest neighbors, and so on, and coagulates all of that information or puts it together in a discrete length, so in a fixed length vector, no matter what is the size of the molecule. Okay, which is very important also for this machine learning application. So very early on, about 5 years ago, we, basically David Ubenot, now my colleague at Toronto as a postdoc, of Ryan Adams, collaboration with us, was able to build a neural version of that. Okay, and that neural version actually started a large field of people thinking of molecules as graphs, using them as benchmarks for machine learning, and there is this large field of called geometric deep learning, where people are actually using these graph representations of, in this case, molecules that are kind of convoluted the same way that I'm showing you in this picture here. What is very nice is that I was inspired by the chemistry. So it's always this interaction between fields that I find interesting personally. So in this recent review paper, perspective paper with my student Benjamin Sanchez, we show that, of course, the art here is, we think that the art here is how to represent something. What is a molecule? What is a protein? What is a gene expression network, etc. All of these different things, you can think about them in different ways, and you can represent them as text. If you know what a smile string is, it's a string that represents a molecular graph. You can think about it as three-dimensional electron densities, or you can think about it as bag of fragments. All of these different representations, how to combine them, is where a lot of the interface frontier topics are in machine learning. So just to show you how the representation is so important, this is one of my most favorite papers in the field, published a couple of years ago by Rishi Kondor and Shubhendu Trivedi, where they looked at the invariance of molecular graphs and built this tensorial representation. Remember, the previous representation I showed you was like a matrix-based representation. Well, this tensorial representation actually adds those symmetries to this convolution. And you can notice how the RMSE and mean absolute error on our data set, the Harvard Clean Energy Project, an early data set that I used for many other applications, but now is used as a benchmark in machine learning, is reduced by a lot compared to, say, our neural graph fingerprints. But a bunch of other methods that you might have heard before, random forest, rich regression, lasso, these are pre-neural network type methods, or at least pre-neural networks in terms of applications in chemistry and material science. Okay, neural networks are also quite old idea, but in terms of application in our field, and notice how they are more or less saturated in the same RMSE, okay? All of the methods more or less give you the same performance. But if you change the representation, then you can get a much better performance, halving the error. And this is where I think the interface in development of methods is the place where we're going to be. So now, super exciting work. Like this is from 2017, and this is results that are actually a little bit more recent. But Ole Sisayev, Justin Smith, and Adrian Reutberg were able to actually do this super cool thing that I'm showing you here. Build a force field. You might have heard about this idea of the force fields, right? Arguably, you know, the Nobel Prize for Molecular Dynamics of Martin Karplus and Ari Warshel and so on comes to the idea of using force fields for bio applications. But you can see here, this force field learned by neural networks building carbon nanotubes and making protein simulations only 10 times slower than molecular dynamics roughly. But these are reactive. You can have protonation, deprotonation, etc. And these force fields are as accurate as coupled cluster methods almost, okay? It's amazing how this field in only 2 or 3 years has reached this this idea that I think that we're going to be able to replace these molecular dynamics applications to fantastic accuracies. So this just gives you an overview of some of the areas where machine learning is already making impact in chemistry. But let's come back to this idea of the generative models, right? Like this idea that maybe a computer can dream molecules, or a computer can generate human behavior in the example of Blade Runner. So there's many different methods. I'm just showing you some of them here in this deck. But this paper that we put on the archive in 2016 took 2 years to publish. It's in ACS Central Science. It's one of my favorite papers of my group of all time. Because what I did is actually took in this Rafa, which is now a professor at MIT, a team, and many other people in the lab, also collaborating with David Dumenot. What we did is actually take this molecular representation and use a neural network that is called autoencoder. Okay, encodes and decodes. What is interesting is that molecules are discrete objects, but we are able to use this neural network to encode it in a roughly 200-dimensional space that is continuous and differentiable. Okay, so that's the weights of the neurons in a particular layer of this neural network that we call in this field latent space. What is cool about these autoencoders is that they do something kind of benign at the moment. They take a molecule, encode it in this compressed representation, and then decompress it and show you the molecule again. So you might have said, Alan, you did the most stupid paper ever. You took a neural network to draw benzene or to draw, Taxol or something. Yeah, in some sense, yes. But what we did that was super cool is we actually used this autoencoder technology from the machine learning field for the first time in chemistry, as far as we know, but to actually then map those 200-dimensional space to a property and then do the following, right? Because we can actually maximize that property in this model, okay? And then backtrack which molecule it corresponds to in this abstract latent space, and then decrypt which molecule was it. So this is a solution to the inverse design problem using machine learning, right? Potential solution for it in the sense that, well, you might say, well, Alan, is it really possible? So I want to skip a lot of the details of the autoencoder and what we did, but what was really cool is that only 1 year later, and this is the paper that I think was relevant for this breakthrough in MIT Technology Review, was the application of these generative models that I just try to explain to you how it works by my colleagues at In Silico AI and my colleagues at Wuxi, and me that I was kind of like a consultant to this project. I mean, they gave me the Royal Last Author paper. What I think there is really like a last author. All these people did the work, and I was helping Alex and the team a little bit. But what is really amazing about this one, and the reason I really like to also be a part of this work, is that they employ that architecture similar to ours. This encoder, decoder, is a little bit different architecture to generate molecules that could bind to this DDR1 kinase. Okay, involved in this particular case is muscular dystrophy. Kinases are a very, very known kind of target in biology. In this particular case, by using different filters, rapid synthesis by Wuxi, and then assays, we came up with 3 molecules that could be good candidates in 46 days. That's pretty sexy, pretty interesting, and again, use AI. Since then, of course, there's more work that came out. For example, Regina Barsilay's lab in MIT and all in antibiotics, and other groups around the world are starting to show that AI for drug discovery is really cool. So where are we in terms of materials? We also, and again, this is more of a biological area, but I'm going to just mention really quickly that we just put out this last year's a paper on crystals. Skipping slides, but showing you that we can also do solid state crystals. And entering the space of, in this case, what I'm showing you here is a very, very, very recent paper, just to whet your appetite. Turns out that my postdoc in my group, Gabe Gomez, is giving a talk in Portuguese at 11 on this topic. So you can go to his Twitter. I retweeted it. And if you want to listen to this topic in Portuguese in half an hour, you can just connect. He's going to be giving a big talk about this paper of machine learning in catalysis. So we move now to the area of catalysis. Okay, so in the remaining 10 to or so minutes of this talk, let me just show you another topic. So now I told you that AI can imagine molecules. Now the question I have is, can it make them? So that's the piece that we started thinking about, the successful stories in automated synthesis. And obviously they come from biology. This is the first paper, one of the first papers in synthesis of peptides. You can see these pumps connected to machinery that actually can use iterative coupling schemes to make peptides. Also, very early on in the space, I was 2 years old when this paper came out. People were using BASIC and ASCII at the SK of GSK, synthesizing molecules in closed loop. So closed loop is interesting because you can actually take the information from the experiment and update your Bayesian beliefs. So I've been saying that. What I mean by that is to contrast it with the so-called design of experiments, which is kind of a factorial design over the variables that you want, that grows pretty badly with dimensionality, because you have to actually build these grids and then evaluate them. And of course, there's a lot of work to make this sparse and interesting, but I argue that this active exploration of space and updating the Bayesian belief is always going to be better. So that's what I like to call self-driving laboratories. We go from automation to autonomy, and the quote-unquote autonomy is this idea of enabling our machinery with closed loop. Have there been examples of this? Yes, there are. For example, here we have my friend Benji Baruyama putting this, I would say seminal paper out there, where he actually built a robotic machine to build nanotubes, iterating the experimental conditions and having a Raman spectrometer measure on the fly, the conditions, and then after 600 loops of Bayesian optimization, he actually can optimize for the particular growth conditions that he wants. That's really cool. Other examples are here: Lee Cronin, Timothy Jamison, and Klaus Jason, etc. are there. So by no means my lab is the only lab that is thinking about this. But the way these Bayesian methods work, they are a combination of exploration and exploitation, okay, of chemical space. Okay, so what we usually use is what notice here again. This is an autoencoder, but now it's using a Bayesian neural network where we encode and decode in this very simple neural architecture, and we use these kernel density estimates, okay, as a surrogate function for acquisition, okay. And that allows us to actually have a parameter called lambda that allows us to be very exploratory or very exploitative and go around and explore chemical space systematically. Okay, so I want to skip a little bit of the mathematics again, just in the interest of time, and show you some of the things that we're trying to put together. So one of the things that we're putting together is this operating system called ChemOS. Okay, it's like an operating system to control these robots that will, of course, connect to the AI, but also connect to databases, connect to high-performance computing, and control the robotics. Okay, so this ChemOS is a tool that will allows us to actually carry out, in collaboration with several people around the world, experimentation with different types of machinery. For example, ChemSpeed, not robotics, TICAN, and other machines. So one of the barriers for this is, for example, the fact that people need to know Python. People need to know how to use JSON. In this case, it's a JSON file for our optimizer. So one of the cool things that I love that Flo and Loic and others in my lab did is basically make it a chat interface. So we spend most of our day nowadays sending each other WhatsApp pictures and texting each other and chatting Facebook and so on. So it's really cool that you can use a tool like Slack, which is kind of like the professional version of that, to actually interact with this ChemOS and talk to it in your favorite language. In this case, right now we have it implemented in English, but that allows us to actually see what happens in your experiment. So I think that's how I think self-laboratory laboratories are going to be. You're going to have this ChemOS type system talking to it in English and it guiding you for experimentation. So you might say, Alan, all of this sounds kind of like, futuristic. Can you show me something? Well, where is the money, right? So this is some of the ongoing work, recently published papers. Of course, this is a Canadian talk, so let's start with work with Canada. This is my good friends and collaborators, Curtis Berlinger and Jason Hine. They decided to build this thin film building robot. If any of you knows this concept of spin coating, right? Spin coating is kind of an art. There's good spin coaters, bad spin coaters. It's very hard to know how, when you make a thin film device, if it's going to be well coated or not. And so therefore building a spin coating robot came from idea to realization in very little time. And here you see the UBC robot is called ADA, that we helped a little bit with the software and the optimization, but basically this is a UBC-led project doing this spin coating. What I really like about this robot is actually doing a lot of this with a modular approach. If you notice these different components here, it's kind of like an optical table, so to speak. You can change and mix and match and use this Canadian-made N9 robot to actually do all the different steps of this particular spin coating process. So in this paper in Press in Science Advances, it should come out any day now, which we're very excited about. We just returned the proofs. The robot explored this two-dimensional space, and you can see here as it went from beginning to end, it found places close to the global maximum of this particular zero mobility that is a proxy for the whole transport efficiency of this particular layer. Again, I'm skipping a lot of the material science. I'm trying just to give you a high-level picture of what we're doing here. But basically, the robot integrated solution processing, casting, measurement, and then, of course, calculations of mobility to try to do this closed-loop discovery. What is interesting is that if you were to actually compare with high-throughput experimentation, then we got an acceleration of 4. And that 4 is modest because we only did an optimization in 2 dimensions. Another example was the exploration of a 4-dimensional space of the blends of organic materials for solar cells. We blend the materials, prepare a thin film solar cell. This is a collaboration with our friends in Germany, Christoph Brabeck, and Advanced Materials just published as well this year. And in this particular work, what is interesting is that we're exploring a larger dimensional space, and we do the same thing. We accelerate a make design test kind of thing, because we actually age for 2 days the solar cells and see which ones did not degrade, and that's kind of the objective function that we're optimizing. And again, you can compare it with high throughput experimentation, where you will need to do the design of experiments. And you can see here a speed up of about 30, because we were able to get to the maxima, or close to the maxima, within a threshold in about 30 experiments. Okay, so last example before I open for questions is this collaboration with Merck. And again, my friend and collaborator Jason Hine at UBC. There is this organic reaction. It's a Suzuki coupling, and what we want to do is keep it enantioselective while minimizing the catalyst, lowering the cost of the solvent, maximizing the yield, etc. So this is a categorical and continuous optimization of about 11 dimensions, right, or something of that level, combined. So that basically made us develop a lot of optimization algorithms to control this ChemSpeed robot at Merck. And my lab has a ChemSpeed as well that, again, we're setting up for organic lasers. So this is kind of like a very sophisticated liquid handler that can heat and cool and do chemical reactions under pressure and so on. So it's kind of like the Cadillac of the chemical robotics. And what is really nice here is that we employed it to explore this space that contains catalysts, room temperature, palladium loading ratios, percentage of modality of palladium, and so on. And we found this particular catalyst and particular conditions for it that make it very efficient. We haven't published this because we found this quote unquote too easy. The Merck people think it's too easy. So now we're doing a more challenging and perhaps more broad screening of catalysts to show a different application before we send this to publish. So just to end this, we continue the development of these Bayesian algorithms. These are already published. Phoenix and Chimera and Griffin are the ones that were used for the last experiment. Chimera allows us to optimize these multi-objectives I told you before, like maximizing a yield, while minimizing this, while maximizing this, while minimizing that. So that is a Chimera. And we're building Gemini and Golem and others that are going to be in this website called Olympus that we're building so that everybody can upload their algorithms and compete with each other virtually in these digitized experimental surfaces so that people can learn which Bayesian optimization algorithms work better in chemistry and material science and biology. And with that, I'm just showing a picture of my research group, a recent one. We need to update it. Hopefully, in a few months again, we can go outside and take a picture, maybe a little bit more separated from each other. But you can see here my contact information, and I acknowledge all the funding. But the most important thing is the research group. And with that, I'm gonna try to open for questions. And thank you for your digital attention.
Thank you so much for that exciting talk, Dr. Aspuru-Guzik. If we are you able to take off the search the sharing screen?
Oh, of course.
And I'm just trying to figure out my own little thing here. All right, so I guess I'll start with a question as the moderator. Fascinating talk here. Now, as a biomedical scientist myself, I like to bring in a couple of terminologies that we use that I feel like maybe you can speak about here in terms of precision medicine and the idea of personalized drugs. As a biomedical idea here, do you think that could you imagine a way to use this material discovery approach to be utilized to make more personalized drugs available in the future? And is this sort of like a way to synchronize and synergize the two fields here?
Yes, I completely believe this is the case. I'm working on it. Actually, I just got a new Frontiers research grant with my collaborator Eugenia Kumacheva and David Sescon from one of the hospitals here in Toronto. So I'm entering that kind of space with a very simple direction, which is we have these cancer organoids grown in a microfluidics device, trying to figure out what is the dosing scheme for them. What is the mixture of drugs that will kill this thing better, and also the dosing timing. So David is very excited about if we do this one first for this amount, and then this one for this amount, and this one for this amount, what kills the tumor best? What I find interesting is that you could imagine that you take this type of experimentation coupled with closed loop, but also coupled with some of the omics related to this particular cancer or the omics related to the patients, right? And you could imagine then putting all of this together. And that's why I like that there is a company in the Boston area called Integral Pharmaceuticals. This is one of these kind of biotech new companies built that is called Integral because it goes from this idea, from the data of the patient to the data of the drugs all the way down to treatment, right? So I think you can think in the medical field, once you have this panopticon of the entire process of drug design all the way down to drug delivery, right? You could imagine that we could be much more precise and say, look, to you, I'm going to give you this, and to you, I'm going to give you that, and so on. Now, I am not a doctor. I am a materials person. I know a little bit of AI, and I'm a chemist. But definitely, I'm very excited about this. And it's funny that you mentioned that. I'm going to have a Skype today with the Medicine by Design initiative at U of T. And we're talking about these topics as well. So your question is very, very topical to me right now because of the Skype later today I have.
Thank you. All right. So the next question comes to us from our host, Dr. Emilio Alarcon. You have discussed about the use of the use in molecules. What about the discovery of functional polymers of larger structures for medical uses? Do you think that we can scale up to larger polymers?
Yes. So good question, Emilio. There are people that already have done fingerprints and machine learning for polymers. One of my former postdocs, now professor at University at Buffalo, Johannes Hachman, he did AI for polymer discovery for high index of refraction materials, for example, for the glasses. Okay, so there is work in that space, and it's really cool space. And therefore, yes, for example, for drug delivery, these polymers, we started working with Christine Allen, my colleague at U of T, also trying to understand this, drug delivery mechanisms, not at the material space, but more at the optimization of the conditions, like the second part of the talk. But for the first part of the talk, kind of devising new polymers, it will be interesting if one could have a robot that makes many, measures many, then we can do the closed loop. So yeah, definitely polymers is a frontier that one should go into, hopefully soon.
And a follow up question here is it's interesting to think about the failed molecules. How useful would it be to use the failure molecules in the learning process of a machine learning?
Wow, no, this is important, and I should have a slide about that. Failed molecules are the most important things in some sense. You need to have the entire space, so that's the reason why I like to say eat your own dog food and have your own closed loop lab, because every failure data point is informing you in the surface. The same way, if you saw the experiment I showed with my friend Curtis Berlinget and Jason Hine, we had failed experiments. There were many experiments, also in the catalysis that I showed very briefly. There's many experiments that sucked, but they help you set up the surface. So people should publish their failed data. So that data, those data points are extremely important for machine learning. And there's a beautiful Nature paper on what is on so-called dark reactions by my colleague Joshua Schreier. Okay, let's see if I can put it in the chat for everybody. So let me type his name and give him a shout out. Schreier. Joshua Schreier has this beautiful Nature paper that he, by the way, he did with they were PIs and undergrads. He was at Haverford College. But in that paper, he actually used all the failed experiments from laboratory notebooks to predict new materials. So yes, everybody here, students and postdocs, save all your bad data and publish it in your supplemental information, because it's going to be gold for the machine learning applications of your field.
And I'll ask one more question here. So once again, going back to the biomedical side of here. So self-driving labs is a very interesting, and it seems to be quite progressing in terms of the chemical laboratory space. Now, do you see a way to integrate this self-driving chemical laboratory with what we in the biomedical sciences are trying to invent and advance in terms of tissue or organ or animal on a chip model?
Yeah, I mean, why not? I mean, self-driving labs. There was a beautiful one recently published from Boston University, and other collaborators, where they're building, doing it for like structural materials, like 3D printing type things. I had to find the reference. I retweeted it, but I didn't look at it very carefully. But you can see the arm doing this closed loop Bayesian optimization. Christopher Reyes is a co-author as well of that paper. This guy is also an active mathematician working in the field, also at Buffalo. Putting some names there in the chat so people know the names, so you can find the paper if you probably go to Google Scholar. And I think that yes, you could have a little, organ, the kind of things that you guys are doing in artificial organ building, that every experiment that you get, you have a Bayesian update and do the next experiment in a closed loop. So if anybody wants to collaborate on that, just shoot me an email. Hopefully we come out of the pandemic and we come and see each other, especially you guys in Ottawa. You can take the train and just do something. That would be really cool. I would love to help you guys grow a better kidney or whatever you guys are doing. That's like Blade Runner, by the way. That's like Blade Runner. In Blade Runner, they also make artificial organs. So it's good to end talking about Blade Runner again. Yeah. If you haven't watched the movie,
that's perfect.
Yeah. Okay.
Seems like we're getting some more questions at the end here.
Luka Vukovic, how do you know how accurate or precise methods were? So yeah, I don't know if I'm missing key molecules, and the more molecules I make, the more I update the deviation prior lookup. So there's no guarantee that I'm gonna get the optimal molecule. The way we think about it is the way we're doing the organic lasers is we have a space of about 10 to 100, 10 to 100 million molecules we can make with a few hundred fragments with the Suzuki couplings. And we are exploring the maxima in that particular subspace of chemical space. First of all, so it's not all the possible molecules. And second, we don't know if we evaluate 100 and we have a response surface and we have 100 data points to build a response surface. We have no idea if there's a hidden maxima somewhere. Getting the optimum of a completely arbitrary potential surface or a particular optimization problem uh, is proved for a general surface is proved to be intractable. It's not intractable. It's tractable, but it scales exponentially with the size of the system. So the optimization problem itself, right? Like formally, it's not possible. So practically, we can get close to the maximum, and I'm showing you some examples. But obviously, if anybody solves that general optimization problem, they will get a Fields Medal, right? It's believed not to be. It's non-deterministic polynomial. Basically means um, it takes a lot of time to actually exhaustively search the optimization space. Um, there is a question about Mariam.
Yes, so I'll read you this as a final question just to respect the timing of it all. So Mariam Ibrahimi says, thanks for your talk. Could you explain how or whether the thermodynamics and kinetics of reaction are included as some of the underneath brain of the AI? As well, do you foresee that the AI can reach studying reactions on surfaces under ultra high vacuum conditions as opposed to ambient and solution, where the reaction pathways can alter from the environmental conditions?
Yeah, so very good question, Mariam, and it's a very chemical question. In terms of the first part of your question, the thermodynamics and kinetics, you check the paper I advertised by my postdoc Gabe Gomez and David Balcells and others that just is impressed in chemical science. We started looking at catalysis, which obviously involves kinetics. So you can check that. So yes, kinetics is something that you can learn barriers and things like that. Second, your question about surfaces. That is the research program of my postdoc in my group, CU Guo. She she is a surface scientist. Worked with here with John Polanyi at U of T, and then joined my lab. And she's very interested in this question of using machine learning for surface science experimentation. So people are going in that direction, and CU wants to go there. So definitely, there's no particular barrier to the chemistry or physics or biology that you want to do. I think, as I was trying to say at the beginning of this talk, this is a general tool that hopefully becomes commonplace and is less and less mysterious, right? It's just a workhorse that you can use almost for anything. That's why I encourage people to look at ChemOS and different softwares like that allow you to do this optimization, Phoenix, Chimera, etc. So there's not too many magical things. So yeah.
All right, I think we've reached the hour length for this seminar. We really appreciate your talk here, Dr. Aspuru-Guzik. Thank you so much for this very informative and exciting information. And I believe you have a few fans here that will reach out to you afterwards in the future. Thank you so much.
Okay, bye-bye.